Hello there, and welcome to this ETS recording designed to showcase our best practice work with clients. My name is Trevor Merriden. I'm a writer and broadcaster with a special interest in leadership, management, and people issues. And I'm here to introduce you to two people, Mark Heasman and Nicky Paris, who really epitomise best practice in the work that they've done together. So Mark, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Hi, Trevor. Thank you. It's good to see you online again. So I'm Mark Heasman. I'm the Group Chief Executive here at Provide. We are a social enterprise that's been going for 13 years now, and I've been the Chief Executive for coming up for 4 years here. And prior to that was the Vice Chair of the organisation for 6 years. So I've been on the board now for nearly 10 years.
Okay, thanks, Mark. And Nicky, why don't you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Trevor. Nice to speak to you this morning. So I'm Nicky Paris, a Director and Client Partner at ETS. And I've spent the last 20 years working with organisations of all shapes and sizes across all sectors, focus on how to deliver the best possible experience for their people, such that they can perform at their very best. And had the pleasure of working with Mark and his team since 2021. Delivering some engagement surveys and some leadership interventions with the top team.
Okay, and now I think it's also worth adding at this point that what we're about to share with those watching this video has not only been great work, but it's been award-winning work. So Mark, let's take a step back. I mean, tell me not only what Provide does, but also why there was a need in your mind to transform its culture.
Okay, so as I say, I've been linked on the board of Provide for a number of years here, and as a non-executive director, you sort of know roughly what's going on, but you don't necessarily know the detail. And obviously, your role isn't to drive the organisation. There is to sort of oversee and provide that sort of strategic leadership. So when I flipped from the non-exec to the exec side of things, there was an opportunity to really get under the skin of where the organisation was at that time, what the challenges it was facing, and what the opportunities were going forward. Bear in mind, this was really early doors of COVID. So we were in the middle of a right early stages of a pandemic. We weren't sure quite how the country was going to play out. We weren't quite sure what the effect on healthcare was going to be. We weren't sure on a whole variety of things. So we were entering into sort of a new era of life in organisational development. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to start to begin to think about how do we prepare Provide for going forward. So just before I look into that, and I think we'll come back to that later, a little bit more about Provide. So we spun out of the NHS 13 years ago. We were just an NHS contract providing community services in mid-Essex, so that's sort of Chelmsford area, basically. We've then grown over those 10 years to provide a number of other health-related services, again, primarily Essex-based at that time, and provide services for the local authority as well as the NHS. 3 or 4 years ago, we made the conscious decision to recognise that we needed to grow and diversify the organisation to protect its long-term future. So we went into a whole series of new markets, and I can explain about what they are later on, geographically and sector, to just provide us with that breadth and stability so that as we go forward, we're not relying on essentially one big customer, the NHS, who can be, can vacillate quite quickly depending on how the market's playing. So that was the decision we took, and we can talk about that a little bit more later about what the consequences were for that in terms of our leadership development and other things.
Okay, so Nicky, if there was this kind of need from Mark and decision to change things in the way you described, what were the first steps that you took to help them?
So when we embark on these sorts of partnerships, the first thing we want to understand is really the current state, the lie of the land. So step one in what has become a longer term programme of work is to get that baseline measure. So designing and running an engagement survey that would help us understand what's the sentiment and the mood in the organisation, how do people feel about the direction of travel and all those good things. And it was quite a bold move, I think, because you were moving away from a survey that had been used previously, moving into something that was more tailored and bespoke for the organisation. So I think there was a leap of faith a little bit, certainly with you, Mark, around sort of not going for something that was sort of already hanging on a shelf somewhere that we could sort of run as a diagnostic. So first step was to get that baseline. And the key to that really is making sure that whatever we're designing is very tailored to the organisation that we're working with. So stakeholder interviews are a fundamental part of that, speaking with Mark and his team to really get acquainted with Provide as an organisation. So some of what Mark's described, where have they come from? Where are they trying to get to? What do you need from a people perspective? Because really lots of our work centres around ensuring the people are well set up to deliver on those broader strategic goals. So all of those things fed into our kind of induction and onboarding as a partner to Provide. There were also quite a few items that were important to capture as well from a kind of regulatory or compliance perspective. So capturing specific pieces of information that we could then really robustly report back to various different external entities was key. And then the whole conversation around external benchmarking. So yes, we want this to be highly tailored and relevant to Provide, but equally we want to be able to give them a read on how they're performing compared to other organisations. And that's not other organisations just in the sector, because of that diversity that Mark's talking about and the growth path. Really what we wanted to do is give them the broadest perspective and comparison against a broad range of different types of organisations at different points in the journey. So the science bit, so having gathered all that context and understanding, is to use our background in occupational psychology. So behavioural psychology fundamentally underpins everything we do. I won't get too geeky or detailed at this point, Mark.
No.
But it's just important to say that really that grounds everything that we do, whether it's the engagement survey or the leadership development that we'll come on to speak about. So in our diagnostics, what we're trying to understand is the link between the cognitive, so how people think about their day-to-day experience that provides, what that does in terms of the emotional side, so therefore how they feel, impact, how you think ultimately impacts how you feel, and that emotional impacts the behavioural side, so how they show up. So when we design the question sets, what we're looking at from an engagement point of view are the emotional and behavioural aspects, so pride, advocacy, willingness to go the extra mile, etc. And all the other things are going to help us understand what might be driving that, and what are the things potentially we can impact once we've got the data back. So that's how we went about getting our initial baseline.
And what did the survey sort of show? What did it turn up?
Oh, that we were rubbish.
Well, I have to say, I was super excited about delivering the results. I think, again,
I was very nervous about this, by the way. First
exactly.
one, I thought, not sure how it's going to play out. It was a complete unknown because the previous stuff was very badly done. So we were starting from scratch here. Well, I had no idea where we would be, where we'd be positioned in the market, where we'd compare to others. Yeah. And then you came back and told us the results.
Yeah. And I knew that was the backdrop. And again, it was that leap of faith to move and do something more tailored with us. But yeah, I was really heartened when we got the set of results. I'm very excited to bring them back to Mark and the board. There was lots to celebrate, and again, we won't go into full detail today, but we can follow up with any further information. But essentially what we got was a really respectable amount of participation in the process, because as Mark's alluded to, the previous exercise hadn't been as ideal as it could be. So really what we wanted to make sure was that we got a good, robust data set. So I think survey one, we had about 62% of the population give us their feedback. The thing we were really happy about was engagement. The baseline for engagement was 90%, which is super, super high. So we designed an index that had 5 custom questions specific to Provide, and the average across those for the business was 90%. So it was kind of a high initial bar in terms of that outcome goal, which is good, but also challenging in its own right.
Well, there was only one way to go down, I thought. At that point.
Well, you did, yeah, exactly. So lots of good news, and obviously our job is to bring that to the table, and we absolutely did that in our various cascades down through the business. But equally, our role at ETS is to look for the opportunities within the data. So we've got thousands and thousands of data points, and data is power and it's interesting, but really it's also noise. So at ETS, we feel very passionately about working through all that noise and working out what we call the signal. So of all the things the business could potentially focus on, how can we distill it down into a smaller number of things that we think will have the biggest impact? And at the time of that first survey, again, whilst it was a very strong set of results across all questions, really, it was the sentiment of the leadership team that, although it was good, I guess with the ambitious plans that you had and your desires around culture, our challenge back to Mark and the board was to say, is this where we need it to be? Could we work on this as a first step? And I guess that's where our initial conversations around sort of work with the leadership began.
And I think we were evolving as a culture. So when we spun out the NHS, we were primarily NHS, which has a certain culture. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it has a certain style and approach to it. And then as we grew and I guess gained confidence in the fact we're a social enterprise and we are a business, we do have to make a profit, but our heart is a social profit, a social enterprise. And we move into that space more. So we needed to build our culture into that as well, which was a different set of dynamics, a different set of drivers, and a different set of leadership skills that we needed. And so the survey gave us that benchmark of these are the areas where actually you've done really well. And there were some very encouraging areas, but there was also some areas you think, well, actually, guys, if you really want to be world-class in your culture, you're going to need to invest in these and you're going to need to work on them to help move you into that transitional space that you want to get to. And that was the next stage we went into with you guys.
Okay, you were very open to that recommendation, I feel, because sometimes when you're talking about sort of the leadership teams, businesses might not always be open to that, but I felt that Mark and the board were really kind of, I think with the initial upfront understanding and work we did around the context and the purpose, there was almost more buy-in to why we might be making those recommendations essentially.
And it's great to see that, you know, that high participation rate that you're talking about, the signals, Nicky, you were talking about, and Mark saying that actually there were some good things in there, and it's a question of how to keep the good things and then improve on the things that you needed to improve on. Now, Nicky, it's one thing for everyone to agree on the need to do something or even what to do, but how do you actually then turn this into an effective, you know, leadership program, for example?
Yeah, sure. So the initial diagnostic had given us that kind of the signal for repeating the term, I guess. So we knew that was our opportunity population and we had a wealth of data from the group that we were looking at. But I guess ultimately what we wanted to do was go back to Mark and his Chief People Officer, Siobhan Morrison, as well, to just make sure we were really on the same page in terms of the journey that we were embarking on. Because when we design these programs, we focus really heavily on the people that we've got in the room. So what are the backgrounds? What are the skill sets? What's the journey that they've been on as a team? You know, what's the current team dynamic? Where are we trying to get them to? Again, we knew a lot of that from the upfront investment in the broader context, but specifically that culture and leadership behaviours. What's our destination? So really getting to grips with that in terms of designing the programme was fundamental. And I think that was when we had our first kind of conversation and you set us off with the fun but not frivolous brief,
Frivolous, yes,
which
exactly.
we've repeated many times.
I know. And I think everyone gets to a point in their career where they've done so much leadership development that it can become a little bit background noise and a little bit dull or a bit repetitive.
Yeah.
And I was conscious that we had a number of leaders in the organisation who would have been through a number of programs over their careers. Yeah. So we wanted to create something that really pushed the boundaries a bit, was challenging, was informative, so they learned something about themselves, whether it be their insight colour, which was brilliant, and everyone now has one of these on their desk and says, yeah, I'm a yellow or I'm a blue or whatever they are.
And every time we meet, we get those out and talk about them, don't we?
And it sits on my desk here in the office. So it's a common language.
Yeah.
It's some common language. We wanted to be a little bit of a rite of passage, everyone went through it. But we also wanted to make it not too corporate, so we wanted to make it quite fun, but not just frivolous. So that fun but not frivolous was a key part of the driver, really, of what we asked you to create as an organisation.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that struck me very strongly in one of the early ones we did is we're talking about our top 40 here, roughly. Is we asked you to, and you came up with this idea of putting everyone on a timeline.
Yeah.
From when you arrived, have you been here within a year or have you been here for like 20 years?
Yeah.
And spread across that timeline, there was a really, really good mix of people. So we had a lot of corporate memory there, a lot of corporate history, a lot of people
Yeah.
who've been here since before we span at the NHS. But then we've also got a lot of fresh bloods and younger people who've come in and want to push back the boundaries. And that mix, I think you as an organisation helped us to gel and bring into one that were perhaps multiple teams beforehand.
Yeah, because I think, again, in that initial briefing conversation, I remember you saying, you know, they are a team, but they don't work together on a daily basis. And because of that backdrop of they've all got on the bus, for want of a better analogy, at different points in the journey, there was a need to do some initial kind of gelling, you know, who are we and who do we want to be as well. So yeah, it was a really helpful kind of initial brief. And then it was sort of an iterative process from there. Now, Mark and Siobhan were brilliant at sort of giving us the four corners of the brief, if you like, and then very much trusting us to fill in the gaps in the middle. But we did sort of, it was a co-creation, so we went back and forth a couple of times just to make sure that they were happy with what we've been delivering. But I think you also gave us freedom and flexibility at the event, which I think we really appreciated.
And certainly from our perspective, and I loved working with you guys because you had the flexibility to move, to pivot very quickly. So there was an issue or something came up in a conversation or in a debate or part of the process, and you had in your tool bag, you were pulling out a number of other tools to say, well, actually, we can unpack that, we can fix that, we can look at that using this method or this tool or this technique. So you weren't just sort of going off a script and going by rote. No, it's 10:33. Now we're going to have a break. Now we're going to. That ability to flex quite quickly was really powerful for us.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad of that, because that's something we focus very heavily on when we're delivering these things. We always say we're not going to end up with a laminated agenda and a script. You must allow us that flexibility, and you know, it's so important to be able to read the room, linger on something where you think, actually, we need a bit more time on this. We need to let this come out into the open, or fast forward on things if people are getting things quickly and stuff. So yeah, I think we'd sort of connect every so often at the coffee break and just make sure, again, it was all sort of in tune with you know, what we ultimately wanted to achieve.
That's great. So you use flexibility there to make that connection between the, as we said, the need to do something, and now you're sort of telling us, you know, stuff about how the program was actually delivered, which sounds really great. I mean, can we talk about results though? Because a lot of people, you know, who would be looking at this might be thinking, well, all this sounds great, but what were the results? I mean, how do we know that it made a big difference?
I mean, for me, I'd say a number of ways that you measure it, some of which are subjective, some of which are objective. Subjectively, I would have, prior to this, I'd have team members come in here who were not particularly well aligned with other team members, and were, you know, coming running to daddy, as it were, to say, can you sort out our problems? And it used to really bug me. Post this, people then had the confidence and the trust and the ability and the tools to say, you know, I'm looking at this through a red lens, I'm looking at this through a blue lens, or I'm looking at this through someone who's been here for 30 years, I'm looking at this through someone who's been here for 5 years. They had the ability, and that had been through that journey together, where they could manage issues and develop problems, solutions to problems together. So that's a subjective thing. Secondly, it's back to a 1980s style of management by wandering about. I love that. So I love managing by wandering about, just getting a flavour for what the organisation is about and where people are at. One of the things I love to do here when I'm out and about visiting our different services and sites is to wander around and say, how are you? How is it? And getting the flavour and getting the temperature. And that managing by wandering about, feedback that I was getting back to me was significant improvement and development in that team working together and feeling part of something. That's the sort of subjective things. Objectively, I'll leave Nicky to talk about this, we had the surveys 2 and 3, where every survey we got to, I was thinking, well, it can only go one way. And I'd spend the week prior thinking, I'm just waiting for a call from Nicky to say, well, I'm sorry, guys, but you've had a great run so far, but it's now fallen off a cliff. But actually, it was the opposite, and we had stellar results. So over to you.
No, we did so many, and again, we won't do justice to it in the time that we've got, but so many stellar results. So there were some so there's a couple of bits from the surveys, but also a couple of kind of anecdotal bits for me. So from a survey point of view, the bits that kind of really stuck with me were the delegates that we work with, so that top 40 that Mark's referring to, because we managed to have 3 two-day events over the course of sort of just over a year with those guys. So when we looked at some of the changes in scores, they were significant. So one that stood out was their intention to stay with the business and that longer term commitment. Again, you know, this is the journey we're on. I want to be a part of that. I mean, the initial survey was 91% agreement from that group. So most companies would be delighted with that as a score. That went up in the second survey to 100% agreement. So everyone in that room was saying, I want to be part of this for the longer term. When we looked at the results for the people that those delegates lead, their confidence in the senior leadership delivering on the broader corporate objectives massively increased. So it went from a 76% agreement to a 94% agreement. So an 18 percentage point uplift. It was just, you know, stellar. The visibility and approachability piece that Mark's talking about. So that was actually a signal from our second survey. And one of our events, we focused quite heavily on that. And we brought in one of our guest speakers to do some work around that. From survey 2 to 3, we saw a 10 percentage point uplift in that score. So people were, you guys were practicing what you were preaching. They were seeing the leaders out in the business. And certainly since COVID, that's what ETS has found consistently in the data that we're capturing through the other surveys that we're running, that being able to see and connect with and feel that the leadership are approachable is really fundamental. I mean, I could go on. I guess the ultimate measure was engagement. So we were very happy with the initial read of 90%. I think we were thinking if we can maintain that, we're good. And we did from survey 1 to survey 2. But in survey 3, I was really excited when we got a 94% engagement that I could come back and play back to Mark and the board. So those are some of the numeric measures that, you know, we can fundamentally prove through the diagnostic. A couple of bits that really stand out, kind of slightly more anecdotally. I think it says a lot about a culture of an individual and a business. So after event 1, Mark sent a handwritten note to myself and my co-facilitator, Paul. So to come into the office a few days after the event and find the CEO having taken the time to write you a note about how successful the first event had gone, that really stayed with me. Still have said notes. And I think the final thing, you'll hopefully attest to this because it links to what you're describing in the workplace, but the people in the room, whilst I felt like the first event was amazing, there was quite an immediate connection with them, the journey between events 1, 2 and 3 in terms of their participation, their openness, their trust with each other and with ETS, and still, you know, the increasing amounts of frivolous fun, but not frivolity. I just felt like we came away from event 3 feeling like it had been a real kind of growth. A couple of the participants really stood out as kind of engaging. So yeah, slightly less quantitative measures, but some of the qualitative stuff.
I mean, the other qualitative or objective measure, I guess, has been that we've gone for some external accreditation through various awards. So some with you, some on our own. And I think over the last 2 or 3 years, I think it's something like 14 or 15 different awards we've either been a finalist for or have won on a national scale to do with culture, to do with delivery of services across the organisation. And that's not us deciding that. That is external accreditators saying, we think you have the best business culture in the UK as an organisation. And that has come through you guys helping us.
Yeah, I mentioned at the start that this was an award-winning piece of work. In fact, it's much more than that in terms of the number of things that you were going in for, as you've just mentioned. I mean, what was it like within the organisation, Mark, to sort of get these accolades? Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how that changed, engagement within the organisation, what people were saying, and then maybe Nicky, maybe tell us what's next in your work together, because obviously there's been a lovely sort of iterative sort of matching of having events and programs and seeing results and then improving and then seeing results and so on. So there's a great sort of team partnership building there. So firstly though, Mark, on what was it like within the organisation to get this kind of recognition?
Yeah, well, it sounds a bit trite, but it was very humbling actually, because we didn't expect to. We've got a brilliant team who sort of help to put our bids together and put them in, but you put them into a mass of other organisations, and we're up in some, I mean, huge Lloyd's, big national organisations in some of these awards, and then when you get the winner is Provide, you're like, really, us? I mean, surely not us. It must be someone else. And that sort of buzz of that energy and that enthusiasm that's come through, and you've taken a table and you come back and you share photographs on social media, LinkedIn, and you tell people about it. People, even if they weren't there or weren't directly involved with it, people like to be part of a winning team.
Yeah.
And if the team is winning, i.e. the team here being the organisation, if the team is winning, people feel, actually, this is good.
Yeah.
You know, we're growing as an organisation, we're diversifying, and we're winning awards. So actually, all in all, Provide seems to be in a good place.
Amazing.
And Nicky, and tell us a bit about what's next on the agenda.
Yes, well, Mark knows me well now that I this is the story so far. So we're in it for the long term. There's always plenty to keep our teeth into. So what's immediately next is we will be sitting down shortly to plan for survey number 4, which may feel a little bit early, but we want to get our heads together early for this year. So survey number 4, very excited to be planning that. One of the big things we're going to focus on is continuing to increase the uptake. So making sure we're capturing feedback from as many colleagues as we possibly can. In April, so that's next month, isn't it? Yeah, we're kicking off a piece of work with one of the divisions, Provide Wellbeing. So we had the pleasure of, so a couple of the delegates were in the work that we've talked about today, but they also took us into their team last year, and we did a series of events which were really, really fruitful. They're on a very exciting growth path. So we've just been invited back to do phase 2 of that work. So we're very excited about that. We've got a guest spot on your Learning and Development Week.
Yep.
So Provide run an amazing week where they bring in guest speakers and events and host a brilliant week for all colleagues. And ETS has been invited to do a bit that will kind of cover or sort of distill down some of what we've done with some of the other areas of the business. So taking some bits from the Colour Insights work, some threads from the engagement survey as well. So hopefully a really engaging session. And then last time we were together, you talked about potentially a future leaders program at Provide, which I'm very excited to hear more about and see where and how
I'm conscious that we've invested in some of our senior leaders, but there are a lot of leaders coming through. There are rising stars. How do we make sure that we develop them and equip them to be running the organisation and running teams in years to come? So that's a live conversation.
Yes, looking forward to that.
Okay, great stuff. I mean, well, it's nearly time for us to sort of finish up here. I mean, do each of you have a sort of final word on what it's been like to work with each other on something that's clearly been so successful?
We love them.
We love a final word.
So I think ETS have been tremendous to work with. I think Nicky and the team have been very, very open to our suggestions. They haven't come in here with solutions. They've come in here with listening ears and then gone away and developed solutions. I think they've approached it in a way which has given us huge confidence in their professionalism. And I think linking the survey stuff with the leadership delivery stuff has been a very, very powerful linkage, because you've got somebody there who understands in detail the drivers and the metrics, and then can turn that into something which actually begins to drive them even higher. So I cannot have enough high praise to say about ETS.
Thank you. And that's wonderful that you made that point, because that was almost one of the first things I was going to, from a technical point of view, that combination of the diagnostics and the intervention, really that is the winning formula, because as Mark's saying, they intrinsically link. You can just learn so much. You can make sure whatever you're learning, you're channeling into the delivery interventions as well. So being able to support across both of those things is key. I think 2 final points for me. One is Mark and his team were from the very beginning really generous with their time in terms of investing in our partnership. Yep. This is not a sort of a supplier client. This is a partnership. And I think that really yielded great results in terms of helping us really understand what makes you all tick and where you're heading, and being part of that journey. And as we alluded to earlier, they were equally very open to when we came in and said, this is all brilliant, but we think we need to tackle this. They really listened and were open to that. And I think, I guess, ending where we started around the cultural piece. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, worked with I don't know how many organisations over the years, but there is something about the culture it provides that I just genuinely love working with them. I see it as we're all part of an extended team, and I just feel genuinely excited about where we go next. I can't wait for the next chapter. So